Thank you, Fosun and CGCC. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to be brief in bringing up Mr. Greenberg, since that is who we're here to listen to and to get his views both on Starr and celebrating its 100th anniversary, founded in Shanghai in 1919, but also on U.S.-China relations, since there's nobody better who has spent decades and really a lifetime on that relationship and making sure it's in the forefront. Rather than read you Mr. Greenberg's bio, which would keep us here for days, and to talk about his business accomplishments, philanthropic work, the boards he's on, I think it's more important really to tell a personal note for someone who spent 30 years leading a business called Leaders, interviewing those in government and business. And I've always found that probably more than there should be, there are many who spend their time telling you that they're leaders and telling you how their companies are leaders. And when it comes to Mr. Greenberg, you will never hear him use that word, because it's his employees, it's his clients, it's his partners, and probably more than anything, it's his competitors, which says a lot, who use the word leader when it comes to Mr. Greenberg. And that's really, to me, the true definition of leadership. So to read his bio really wouldn't do it. To me, it's words like integrity and honesty, quality, passion, that really are the bio and what he's all about and define leadership. So it's an honor to be on the stage with him. Afterwards, he'll take a few questions if you'd like, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. So if you come up, Mr. Greenberg, I'd appreciate it. First, to look at Starr Company, you really have to look back 100 years to where it all started in Shanghai. This is a company that has been through a lot in the early days and through its time. Can you talk a little bit about that history and really the endurance that this company has shown to get where it is today?
Be happy to. First of all, thank you for helping have this thing happen tonight. And the Bank of China, I want to thank them very much for being the host. Starr went to China. He grew up in California, and after World War I, he was looking what to do. He studied law, but he didn't want to be a lawyer. Understandable. And so he went to Shanghai and started an insurance company. He didn't have much money. He was backed by several Chinese bankers who helped him. He was the first and only at that time American insurance company in China. He had two things he did that was different. The British and French insurance companies would only sell insurance to companies from their own country. They wouldn't insure Chinese companies. Starr did the opposite. He insured Chinese companies, hired Chinese employees, and didn't waste much time on the other foreign companies. And he grew from the beginning. It was a great success. When World War II began, he had to leave. He helped the Chinese in the meantime. They took all the furniture and the office information and spread it among themselves. He came back right after World War II. Everything was reassembled. Then, of course, the revolution began, and he had to leave. He never went back to China. Of course, during the revolution, there were 2 decades of not mixing in the world. I was the first one to go back. I went back in 1975 and met with several of the people in Beijing, including the People's Insurance Company, which was a tiny company. It probably had about a couple of hundred people, if that. And we helped them. They didn't know much about the insurance business. We taught them what we could. We trained a lot of their people, both in and out of China. We put them on our treaties, so they got some foreign business. And that relationship grew. I was going back at least once or twice a year, because we operated all through Asia. And so when I was in the region, I'd stop in to China. And over the years, and it took quite a while, when Zhu Rongji was mayor of Shanghai, I got to know him. He asked me to help them form something called the International Business Advisory Council, called IBLAC in Chinese. And I did. The purpose was to try and attract foreign companies to invest in Shanghai. It was a great success. We're celebrating next month our 30th anniversary of IBLAC. It's a big deal in China. And it's a big deal in Shanghai. Shanghai, of course, has been hugely successful. And IBLAC was an important part of that success. There was a lot of investment made by members of IBLAC in Shanghai. It took 20 years. We finally got a license. After 20 years, we got a life license for the only foreign company, and that's true today, incidentally, the only foreign insurance company, life insurance company, 100% owned by a foreign entity, is AIA, a Hong Kong-based company that we had founded, and it grew enormously. Today, that company is bigger than AIG. It was sold when I left the company, was forced out by Elliott Spitzer here in New York. And the AIG is now a fraction of the size that it was. And AIA is much bigger than AIG today.
When you look at how Starr has evolved, many who don't know that history, can you talk about the scope of the business today and really where you see the strengths for Starr?
Yeah, look, we had a lot of knowledge about the international insurance business. AIG was licensed in 137 countries. It was the largest insurance company in history. No one has ever reached the size that it was. When we took AIG public, just before Starr died, we had a market cap of $300 million. When I left the company, it was $180 billion. No one has ever reached that size as a public insurance company. Not likely to do it in the near future. So when I left AIG, we had the C.V. Starr and Company, which we never put into AIG. We kept that out as a private company. We took it out of mothballs, and we started with 3 people. My investment man, and my finance guy, and myself, and our secretaries. We have close to 4,000 people today. We're operating around the world. We have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience in many countries, so we have no problem either getting business or attracting people. So it was starting all over again. We expect to build a very much bigger company than we have today, but we're private, we're profitable, we're doing quite well. We'd like to do better. I hope we can write some of your business.
For someone who went, as you meant, to China so long ago, even today you have U.S. companies and others talking about how challenging it is to do business in China. You always talk about the relationships you forged. Is that in the forefront, building relationships? And what do you tell those, and what advice do you give them about being successful in China?
Well, our company was founded, as I said, in China. We're celebrating our 100th anniversary. Incidentally, at the same time that we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of IBLAC, same dates virtually. I'll be in China for both those events. But you know, the relationship is one of the most important in the world. I wrote an op-ed piece about 2 weeks ago. I think some of you have copies of it. I believe very much that the U.S.-China relationship is the most important in the world. It's a much safer world with U.S. and China as allies and friends and trading partners than with anybody else. I think it's very important that we do that. I put a little history in the op-ed piece of why I think that China has to make some changes in the relationship of trade. There's got to be a more even-handed approach for foreign companies, speaking about American companies now, in China. Many are treated somewhat differently. I can't complain. Our own company has done quite well in China. So it's not that it's a complaint from me. It's not. I'm concerned about the relationship overall between the U.S. and China. Many American companies feel that they don't get treated equal as the Chinese company. The Chinese company doing business in the United States, you have to have a more even relationship. When you go back in history and you look at the things that the U.S. did for China when it was a small country in size, in economic size, we did a great deal. We helped China in many ways, in trade, and during the war, even before AIG was in, even before U.S. was in World War II, the Flying Tigers were created out of the U.S. military to help China, and they did. And so we spilled a lot of blood as a country on China's behalf. Rightly so. It was the right thing to do. And then, of course, when China began to grow, now the second largest economy in the world, soon to, and I agree with the prior speaker, it'll soon be the #1 economy in the world. 1.4 billion people in China against 300 million in the United States. And China's come a long ways on knowledge, on education, many educated abroad, going back to China with a lot more knowledge how to do things. I'm on the advisory board of Tsinghua University. It's a great school, great people. They can compete any place in the world. And so these changes are taking place as we sit here. You can't have the same, I don't think it's right to have the same restrictions against foreign companies in China today that was needed before. It's not. It's not so. So we have to solve that problem. I have hopes that President Trump and President Xi will meet sometime in the next month or two and personally resolve the issues. I believe it's in their hands to do, and I think they can do it. I do my part as much as I can to help in that regard. I believe it's important for both countries and for the future of the world. So I'll be glad to take any questions.
Are there any questions from the audience? Mr. Greenberg?
Yes, Richard Black from the Schiller Institute. There were just 50 heads of state from all over Africa in Beijing. Yes, there were just 50 heads of state from all over Africa in Beijing for 2 days, as you know, at the beginning of the week. In Italy, the new government has formed a task force China. My question really is, to what extent would you see U.S. and China co-investment in third parties? Let's say as in the Transaqua project in Africa. The new president of Mexico coming in has excellent relations with China and is discussing with President Trump development deals for Mexico. So the question is, in light of the occurrence, which we think is historic, we at the Schiller Institute in Beijing this week, what would be the prospects for practical U.S.-China joint investment in third countries in the Southern Hemisphere?
I think it'd be fine. But you have to look at the investment. Is it being done for political reasons or for business reasons? If the business makes sense, I have no problem. If it's only political reasons, then I question it. For example, right now, China is spending a lot of money on the One Road, One Belt projects around the world. Many of those countries are going to have difficulty repaying the loan. It's going to be very difficult for some. But that project is very important to China. China wants to have almost another Silk Road. Whatever their reasons are, the infrastructure is necessary. We're helping to ensure some of that infrastructure. And we enjoy doing it. We help the Chinese companies by doing so. And so I think it depends on the purpose of the third-party investment. Is it for business? Does it make sense? Or is it political?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
You don't get a crack at me all the time, so.
Hello, good to see you again. Henry Tang from Committee
Yeah.
100. How do we get Americans and the West to proactively join in and accept that the Belt and Road Initiative and the AIIB is a global project and not just a China project?
On the one run boat,
One road.
I think the U.S. will look at it, not as a government, but many companies will look at it as a business. If they're going to participate in the loans, what they're going to ask how they'll be paid back and over what period of time, and how will it benefit them. They're looking at it from a business point of view. Now, recently, I think last week, the U.S. government announced that they're going to be spending some money on infrastructure projects around the world also. There's 5 countries can do that, and there wouldn't be enough money. There's a lot of investment that's needed.
In effect, in the history of global loans at the World Bank and other places, one of the possible solutions might be this extended maturities. In effect, that's what's really happening when many loans are refinanced anyway. However, when looking at AIIB, many people point out that, oh, these loans can't be repaid, et cetera, such as in Pakistan. But the extension of maturities is a solution.
Well, you can do
Very
that. You can
self-fulfilling.
extend the loan. But what's happening, I think, is that supposing the loan is made to the XYZ country, and for a road going through, will they have as collateral part of the port system or part of the railroad system? Whatever is important to them, and that's probably what's going to happen.
Over the years, the Chinese have established work rules for, or business rules for foreigners coming into the country that were particularly onerous and difficult for people to enter and do business in that country. Do you think Xi is willing to open up the markets in a more creative and typical free market way than the Chinese have behaved historically?
My experience has been as follows. Admittedly, we had a different relationship because of our time in China, and the fact that we were very helpful to China's leaders in the early years of our being in China. What happens? President Xi made a speech not many months ago in that island. Yeah. And he announced publicly at that time they were going to open the market for the insurance sector and the banking sector and several others. So months go by and nothing happens. My experience with that has been, and this is part of the thing we have to overcome, the leaders, the government leaders of those sectors, insurance, which is CERC, or banking, are not sure what he means. Okay? They can't pick up the telephone and call him. So they wait for more instructions. Nothing comes down. Then they're changed, and a new leader comes in for that area, and nothing happens. And so part of the problem, and I experienced some of this, we work with a government entity, and they retire the leader of that entity, and the new guy coming in. We worked for several years to build a relationship. He's gone. And somebody else comes in, he doesn't know us, and we don't know him. You have to start all over again. It takes time. And that's one of the complaints. That's got to be resolved. I talked to several senior people in the Chinese government. That is a problem. And he said, we know. We have to create jobs. So they retire them much younger than we retire them here. That is a problem.
Any other questions?
There's one back there.
Mr. Greenberg, Jeff Hool with DLA. I was at Tsinghua last month discussing the new change in the CFIUS rules in the United States under FIRMA to the executive MBA alums. It was an interesting dialogue. In the context of foreign direct investment in the United States and restrictions imposed under CFIUS and FIRMA, counterbalanced by the currency and capital restrictions in China in terms of investment outside of China, how do you think that will play out in terms of U.S.-China trade over the next 5 to 10 years?
I'm not sure I understand what you were saying.
The U.S. has imposed new restrictions under CFIUS, which
Yeah.
restricts foreign investment in
Yeah.
the United States.
Yeah.
The Chinese particularly think it's targeted to them. It's all foreign investors, which restricts, without governmental approval, U.S. government approval, direct investment in the U.S. in a myriad of assets, including critical technologies, as well as real estate that's strategically close to U.S. national assets. China, on the other hand, has currency restrictions, where currency leaving China is controlled and approved by the government. Both seem to be constrictive on U.S.-China trade. Do you think that's a trend that will continue in the near term, or do you think that there is a political solution at hand?
There has to be a political solution. Look, my belief is that a lot of these separate rules that China has is an outgrowth of the history in China. It was a different country, small, and their size has outgrown some of the rules that they've had. And the United States companies don't want their technology taken without proper rewards for it. The same as China would not. Nobody wants that. And so there's a lot of things that have to be straightened out. I believe it can be done. It's up to leadership to do so. I had a visit last week by about 15 Chinese from government. We had a long talk about this, and they came to see me and Henry Kissinger separately. And I haven't talked to Henry since we met. But I was very candid with them, as I was in my op-ed. I believe that China will soon be the largest economy in the world. It's number 2 now. The changes that have been miraculous. I congratulate the Chinese people for what they've accomplished. But you can't have the same benefits today that you had when China was a small and just developing economy. It's not right. There has to be some equality in the relationship. I'm all for, I believe that U.S.-China relationship is the most important in the world today, and will be so for some time. It'd be a mistake if that broke apart. It's a mistake for the whole world. So I work hard on that because I believe it's a very important issue.
Any others?
One back there.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Brett Johnson from Ultra Institute. So how would you architect a strategy to connect China and the U.S.? What would you do to foster this connectivity that would solve these issues?
What I would do, I would not use bureaucrats to do this. I would try and pick 2 business leaders of big companies in the United States and in China and put them in a room and say, you're going to stay there until you got a goddamn thing fixed up. And you know what? They'd come very close to getting it done, I believe. I don't think Trump and President Trump and President Xi could solve it if they can agree on some basics. Is that possible? I don't know. I'd say I'd give it a try. If they can't, then I'd have two from each side, full time, until they got it resolved.
Hi. I think under almost any scenario, the trade solution is going to take a while to resolve. My question is something that China has much more direct control over, which is its capital account. What would be wrong within the interim diverting a portion of the Belt and Road Initiative to the United States, say 20% of it, to fund President Trump's, at least a down payment on President Trump's #1 domestic policy initiative, which is the rebuilding of American infrastructure?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that American companies want to have access to the Chinese market. They should be treated fairly. The question of infrastructure in the United States, we should be able to do it ourselves. I don't care how we finance it, by a special tax if we have to, but it shouldn't be up to another country to do that for us. That's my belief. Thank you. Thank you very much.